Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential. It's your weekly look at the latest royal news brought to you by The Mail. I'm Jo Elvin and my panel today is the Daily Mail's editor-at-large Richard Kay and the paper's diary editor Richard Eden. Why have one Richard when you can have two? That's what we always say, and we're very lucky to have you both. We'll also have a special report from Boston from our Rebecca English in a few minutes, but we're going to start the show with a new royal race row that has hit the royal family. Lady Susan Hussey, a former lady-in-waiting to the late Queen, has apologised and resigned after she repeatedly asked a black guest at Buckingham Palace where she was quote-unquote really from. Her godson, the Prince of Wales, has condemned the comments. We asked journalist and broadcaster Stephanie Tecci for her views.
Well, when I first read about this reported exchange, I was quite shocked that, for another week running, there's been another race row, which is affecting both the Queen Consort and King Charles. But I thought to myself, it didn't need to go so far where this person in question has resigned from their role. I think there needs to be a bigger conversation now about how the monarchy going forward, including its staff, is going to handle race relations. We're in that kind of era, woke era at the moment, where everybody's quite sensitive when it comes to issues of race, and the answer is not about resigning or firing people. It's about having conversations so these such situations do not happen at all. I've had this conversation loads of times, with people from an older generation, from the Queen's generation, who are quite fascinated about my heritage and want to know more. I'm used to it, but someone else such as this lady in question from Sister Space, it comes a bit of a shock to her. As she said, she was traumatized by it, where it's that kind of colloquial language of where are your people from. Some people might not get offended by such statements, but other people will do. And that's where it's time for the royal family to start having these uncomfortable conversations on what needs to be avoided when you are talking to someone from an ethnic minority in the future. Yeah, I do think it's a shame she stepped down from her role, because I think, she's had a lifetime of service towards the monarchy, and she wanted to support King Charles and Camilla going forward. And it doesn't really deal with the issue at hand. You can't make an example of people just by firing them. She comes from a certain era, not saying it's okay what she's did, but it's more getting rid of that kind of thought where ignorance is bliss. Let's talk about this openly. Let her kind of approach the woman again and say where she was coming from. This is a learning curve both for a black person and also someone who's worked in the royal family for a very long time. We can't keep on hiding these conversations anymore.
Well, last night we also heard the views of royal biographer and friend of the royals, Gyles Brandreth.
Totally inappropriate. On her side, people will say she's a lady in her mid-80s. She reflects maybe the way of speaking of her generation. She's apologised profoundly, she's stepped aside, etc. And you'll have seen how quickly the action was taken to have her step down. From my experience, that doesn't reflect, and I'm writing about the Queen and the royal family, I have had no experience of that at all. Indeed, quite the reverse. I don't know if it's in this book or in my book about Prince Philip, but I remember an incident in the 1970s or 1980s where I was at a private dinner with the Duke of Edinburgh, and somebody across the room, across the table, was telling a story that was in poor taste. It wasn't a racist story, but it was not acceptable. Today it would be not acceptable. Then it probably was acceptable. But half hearing it, the Duke of Edinburgh turned on this man who was a friend of his and said, "No more of that, I don't like it." And stopped him in his tracks.
Can you give us any more detail on what kind of story?
No, it was a story that had overtones that we would not like.
Yeah.
I don't remember the detail because it was across the room and I was sitting here. But I do remember he only half heard it and stopped the man. It was a private occasion. There was no press there. So that wasn't their instinct was. And in terms of the Queen, I just have to tell you, that is so not what she was like or about in any shape, sense or form.
That was Gyles Brandreth. Put a note in your diary, actually, because next Monday and Tuesday we will be running that interview in full over 2 parts, where he'll be talking about his new biography of the Queen called Elizabeth, an intimate portrait, and you can pre-order it on the link below. Let's bring in our panel now. Richard Kay, you have written today in the paper about Lady Susan Hussey, someone really at the heart of the royal family.
Very much so. I mean, she's been a companion to members of the royal family. She worked for the Queen for 60 plus years, and she was inherited, if you like, by the Queen Consort. Camilla wanted her alongside her as well when she took on her new role. But she transcended mere royal aid. She was someone who was a friend of members of the royal family, very close to Prince Charles as he was growing up, and other family members. And she is, as we've discussed, Prince William's godmother, and that was quite an honour to receive that in 1982. And so I would argue that she was as close to the royal family as any figure around them.
Obviously, this is unfortunately not the first time there's been a bit of a race controversy where the royal family is concerned. Why was she even discussing what she was discussing, do you think?
Well, I think that one thing that perhaps has been overlooked in all this is the role of someone like the lady-in-waiting, of the companion, as they're now called, to the monarch or to the monarch's consort. They're often there to break the ice. Most of the people who arrive at Buckingham Palace or in the presence of royalty are overcome by nerves. And it's the job of people like Sue Hussey to make them relax, and quite often to find out a bit about them, because at some stage they may well be introduced to the Queen herself, and it would be very useful for the Queen knowing who she's going to meet, what their backstory is. And I think in a rather clumsy way and a rather extended way, I grant that Lady Susan went a bit too far. But a lot of people have jumped in and highlighted this particular phrase about "where are your people from?" Now that's a gross misunderstanding. It is something she has said to me on occasions when I've met her at palace receptions, and what she means by that is, what branch of your family are you from? Are you a branch of the Norfolk case, or are you a branch of the Suffolk case or the Sussex case?
But that you have to concede that it's a much more loaded thing for a person of colour.
I understand that, and for someone with Lady Susan's experience, and she would have met more people of colour and different ethnicities than very many other people in this country, it was a bit of a miscalculation.
Richard Eden, the response was breathtakingly swift. How do you think the palace handled it?
I have to tell you something. I was really nervous about coming on today.
Yeah,
I just thought,
the three white people discussing the racism.
Yeah, but this subject, you just live in fear of being cancelled and everything. And I'm just so sick of this whole sort of cancel culture. Someone says something, yes, it was clumsy and offensive to the guest who was at the palace, and then she's condemned. It's sort of, burn the witch. She's immediately thrown out like some sort of dirty old rag. And on the basis of one conversation. We've all said things that we regret. My goodness, I could have been cancelled 1,000 times over for silly or clumsy things I've said in the past.
Wait till 5:30 today. No,
and I just thought the reaction was wrong. They just rushed out this statement that she's basically been sacked. I mean, this is not someone who gets paid. This is someone who's devoted her life to service. But then, moreover, after the statement sort of that she'd lost her position, then Prince William's spokesman comes over and, gives her a kicking when she's on the floor. I thought it was very unedifying, and there was no need for that at all.
How do you think the Queen would have handled this, Richard Kay?
Well, almost certainly it would have been handled in an entirely different way. She would not have countenanced the idea of Lady Susan being asked to pack her bags. I think Sue Hussey's attitude was she could see almost at once, and she's an intelligent woman, that this was going to cause a massive storm. It would overshadow whatever was going on at the Buckingham Palace.
To be honest, it has done, even with this scenario.
Right, it has.
Yeah.
So I believe she went in the hope that it would draw a line under it. Well, it hasn't, but she wasn't to know that.
And do you think this will? I do kind of really echo Stephanie Tetchy's comments, where I can't believe there hasn't been more stringent training in the wake of Meghan and Harry's, proclamations about race, the proclamations of, the accusations of bullying that have haunted the palace staff. Like, surely there has to be some change.
It's hard if you've got people of all ages. They're trying to make sure the household's welcoming, and they've retained someone who's been in service for so long, someone who's in their 80s. I think you do have to make some allowances, that people move with the times, sure, but it's a different generation. We're all products of the generation that we're brought up from, and sometimes you can feel a bit lost in when culture suddenly changes.
Do you think this will prompt any visible changes at the palace?
I'm sure they will, but whether it does strike me as slightly patronising, this idea that you can ask octogenarians to go through some sort of new, training after all the years of service. Look, things will change. There's no doubt that King Charles wants to do things differently anyway from his mother.
Great timing, Richard Eden, isn't it?
It was all unfortunate because the summit where this happened was fantastic. It was the Queen really laying out her stall and something she's campaigned very strongly and vocally, a very difficult subject about domestic violence, and that's why this lady was invited, because she's in charge of a refuge for women, and so all people from all different walks of life had been invited, and then yet this is being overshadowed by this row, so that's unfortunate, and also the timing of William and Catherine's arrival in America, and then all the Harry and Meghan stuff from before, so yes. Terrible timing.
Well, we will, of course, follow any development on that story, but let's turn to some of your comments now. And Laurie Leaney follows up on our discussion on what role, if any, Prince Andrew might be able to hold. And Laurie says, Andrew has the ability to be active in his country just like the rest of us do. He can volunteer to help homeless shelters, food banks, etc., just not in his official capacity, without recognition, like the rest of the population, ! If he really wants to help, this is what he needs to do. If he just wants recognition and money, well, then we know where his heart actually lives. Strong words there. But you've also been commenting on the Prince and Princess of Wales's trip to the US, which we were just discussing, and how it coincides with the Sussex's Human Rights Awards. Tam Can is here to educate us non-Americans. She or he says, to understand why Kerry Kennedy chose to award Harry and Meghan is to understand the competitiveness within the Kennedy family. I think I did have an inkling of that. Caroline Kennedy and her children partnered with William for Earthshot, a major initiative. Kerry's competitive nature with her cousin Caroline had to try and usurp that moment. Even Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is puzzled as to why they are being awarded. Joseph Kennedy fostered intra-family competition, and that tradition still goes on generations later. Fascinating. We should start a Kennedy Confidential. That would be fun. Well, speaking of that trip to Boston, the Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English has sent us this report.
Good evening from Boston. Now, I must apologise for my surroundings. I wish I could show you somewhere more glamorous, but actually this is the day-to-day reality of a royal tour. An anonymous hotel room after the end of a very long and gruelling day when the weather outside is simply atrocious. And it's not been the easiest of first days for the Prince and Princess of Wales as they arrive in the US on their first royal visit since 2014, because of course they landed as a royal race row was breaking back in the UK involving Prince William's godmother, Lady Susan Hussey. Now, the Prince of Wales' spokesman was very prepared for this to be an issue. In fact, they broached the subject with us before we broached the subject with them. And during a briefing, they said that William's spokesman said he'd spoken to the Prince before he got on his own plane from the UK to the US, and wholeheartedly supported what he was about to say, which was that racism has no place in the royal household, and the comments that were made were condemned, and the right action appeared to have been taken. That said, they do want to move forward with what they're here to do, which is 3 days of visits in and around Boston before the keynote Earthshot Prize Awards on Friday. And today they attended a ceremonial welcome at City Hall with the Mayor, Michelle Wu. There were several thousand people actually out to greet them, despite the really inclement weather. And William gave a short speech outside to great applause. Later, there was a surprise visit. Well, it was at least a surprise to the people there, as the couple dropped in to watch the local Boston Celtics basketball team play a home game in the city. They were very warmly welcomed as they walked in. There was you could hear the ripple of surprise going around the building. At one point they appeared on the giant Jumbotron, the big screen that you see at these matches. It was pretty much widespread and very warm applause. There was a smattering of boos and a few shouts of USA, USA, but a couple of people seated next to me explained that Obviously, Boston has strong Irish Catholic links, and it was probably more of a kind of anti-UK sentiment as opposed to an anti-William and Kate sentiment. Now, although they're in the same country as Harry and Meghan, who moved to the US, of course, acrimoniously in 2018, there are no plans for William and Kate to meet up with the Sussex or indeed even touch base with them. And I think what's really interesting, in the very short time I've been here, is that there has been little to no mention of the Sussexes whatsoever. In fact, I would say, as far as the television footage that I've seen, is that William and Kate's trip has been hugely anticipated and is being very well received. Now, of course, we do have the prospect of Harry and Meghan's new docu-series with Netflix dropping any day now, and I fear there is a real chance that the publicity drive for this show could begin this week while they're still here. I know William and Kate and their team are really hoping to be able to focus on what they want to achieve with this visit to the US without any further distractions. Whether they will be able to do so may not be in their hands.
Rebecca English there. Let's bring the panel back now. Richard Kay, you've been on how many foreign engagements?
Too many.
Countless. How will William and Kate view this task at hand, do you think?
Well, I think first of all they'll be faintly amused by the notion that they're part of a very competitive family dynamic when they're
Can't relate.
Because of course that happens in the Windsors too. There's nothing more competitive than the royal family when it comes to stealing the limelight. Well, William has become quite a mature performer on the foreign stage now. But nevertheless, it is awkward for him that within 2 days, I think, of his departure from Boston, little brother Harry rocks up in New York, where there'll be an even more glamorous event for him and Meghan to attend.
Fascinating. Richard, this one does feel, particularly with the Sussexes down the road, like very important to the brand of Prince and Princess of Wales.
Oh, it really is. I mean, Earthshot is, massive significance, something that Prince William's invested so much time and effort in. And I think it really shows the practical nature of what he hopes to achieve. So, it's a prize where they're trying to do something positive about the environment. It's not just kind of complaining, oh, aren't things awful? He's saying, what can we do to make a difference? What projects can actually do something constructive? And he's trying to reward that. So it's a terrific project. And I think it's very much in contrast to that sort of victim culture and that kind of just endless moaning that we see from his brother and his wife.
It's so interesting. I heard on the Today programme the other day one of the finalists talking about their edible seaweed packaging, which is fascinating, and that's one of the finalists. So it gives you hope, I think. But Richard Kay, obviously the Walesers will not publicly acknowledge the clash of diaries, but do you think they're secretly having a bit of a big old eye roll?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think Earthshot's terrific in many ways, but it isn't the major reason why this is an important trip. It's an important trip for the royal family as an institution, because America has more or less been surrendered by the family ever since the Meghan and Harry fallout and their accusations on the Oprah Winfrey interview. America has sided very much in the Harry and Meghan camp. This is so important to the House of Windsor to try and reclaim that love that existed in America for many years, largely because of the Queen, of course, but also for the late Princess Diana, who was a hugely popular figure. I think Americans are going to be slightly conflicted. They loved Diana, they love her sons, but one son is pitched against another. So how this trip plays out is incredibly important for the long-term well-being of the monarchy.
And Richard Eden, do you think there's a strategy being discussed in the Sussex camp? What do you think they'll be making of all of this?
I dread to think. I mean, I really do think Harry and Meghan will be loving this race row back at Buckingham Palace, because it vindicates their fears and what they've said before. It kind of gives them evidence for their
and it validates the award
complaints. Yes, they're due to get this human rights award, and Kerry Kennedy has said that's because of their sort of standing up to racism and all this sort of thing. So we'll see what they say when they collect the award, but I hope they don't. But they may refer to the events we've seen yesterday.
Something tells me that there's a high probability of that. Well, I've been asking the question so far, But let's have some of yours. We've had a few about what the future of the royal family might be. Lorraine Levy asks, when those royals in their 80s retire or pass, William is king, so who is left to support the monarchy if he doesn't use his cousins? Is William going to cover the whole Commonwealth, for instance, by himself? Richard Kay, it still feels like we don't really know exactly how that will work.
No, we don't. And I think it's been a recognition by the new king that perhaps he was a little hasty all those years ago when he started talking for the first time about a slimmed-down monarchy. Now that he is the monarch himself, he realises what their reach is, what their requirements are, and he do need all these relis. All those cousins in Kensington Palace that he was quite keen to pension off are actually quite useful. But they are ageing, and at some stage they will have to stop. They can't go on forever. And we will have to find a new generation unless the royal family are going to completely change and go in a different direction, sever their links with many of their charitable interests and concentrate just on the core family. That's entirely possible. I mean, I think William is much more likely to look to the European model for his future as king.
Now tell me, this is something that really does interest a lot of our viewers, is this discussion over whether or not Prince Edward should receive the Duke of Edinburgh title, and you've written rather sympathetically for him about that.
Well, over the years, it's always been the view at the palace, and it was certainly his late father's view, Prince Philip, that he would one day like his youngest son to take on his title. He thought, well, you know, Prince Charles was going to be king. The others have got various titles. Edward's had a rather contrived title invented for him for his wedding to Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999. Wessex is a place which doesn't really exist after all, but Edinburgh most certainly does. It's a substantial city in its own right. It's the capital of one of the four countries of the United Kingdom. So I think the view at the palace was that it would be ideal for Edward to take the title. We now know that King Charles has a rather different view, that Edinburgh is such an important royal title, it shouldn't be passed to a minor family member, because it would eventually just disappear once Prince Edward was no longer with us. It would pass to his son, and what is the long-term future of the title? And I think Charles wants to keep it more central control over these titles, and he has his own ideas on where it should go.
Well, Mirabelle Nassau has her idea as well, and she says that Prince Edward deserves the title, and it would be dishonourable to the express wishes of their parents not to confer the title to him. Further, there will be a public outcry and backlash against His Majesty the King if he refuses to confer the title. He doesn't need to be close to his younger brother to give him what is rightfully his. He needs as many loyal people, or is he seeking to hold it in trust for Harry or Louis? What do you think he'll do, Richard Eden?
From everything I've been told, that the King won't give it to Prince Edward, and how upsetting for Edward, to be regarded as a sort of minor royal when he's the King's brother. So it's a very hard thing to take, and I sympathise with him, and I think it is a mistake. I would like to see him and Sophie become the new Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh.
Watch this space. Well, a reminder that we will hear lots about the late Duke of Edinburgh in our special interview with Gyles Brandreth next week. That will go out Monday and Tuesday. Meanwhile, it's montage time. We know you love it. This week we look at some of our favourite pictures of the royal family on American soil. Enjoy those, and we will see you Monday. Bye-bye. you.